I am at the beach, folks. I drove my wife to a yoga retreat. We are in El Palmar, which is a beach town, beach community in Cadiz, which is on the Atlantic coast of Spain in the south. We're about an hour from where we live in Seville, Spain. So I figured I'd take advantage of the trip to make a video on the beach, and then I would return home. I'm going to talk about a book that I enjoyed very much. In fact, it's been a long time since I've read a recently published book that has spoken to me so uncannily. I would consider it a astonishing gem of a book. So much so that I read it twice in a row, back to back. I can count on two hands the number of times that I've done that with a novel. The book is titled The Other Jack by a writer named Charles Boyle. He's British. He's published, I think, 11 works of prose and poetry, both under his name and under various pseudonyms, one of which is Jack Robinson, hence the title The Other Jack. Boyle is a very interesting guy. He's also a publisher. The Other Jack was published in 2021 by his own press, CB Editions, which he founded in 2007 when he was about 56 years old, which is my age. It's a one-man operation based entirely on his tastes. He went into semi-retirement in 2017, but the press still publishes new titles every once in a while. They're gorgeously edited books, by the way. Minimalist, mostly with brown covers, but stylish, like this one. Would The Other Jack have been published if he hadn't been the director of the press that published it? In this day and age, I doubt it. It's just too esoteric, too dispersed, too eccentric. There's no real character development, there's no real plot. Nonetheless, I consider it a wonderfully gratifying read for anyone who likes a certain type of literature. It's billed as a book about books, but I'd say it's more a book about a certain type of book, or canon of literature. The canon that happened to fuel my love of literature and my desire to write. And admittedly tied to white, male, middle-class high culture, or what used to be white, male, middle-class high culture. Stendhal, Flaubert, Henry James, Ford Maddox Ford, Joseph Conrad, Walker Percy, Delmore Schwartz. He mentions James Salter at one point. He calls himself out for this, by the way. And I should say that he also mentions many women writers and many writers that I haven't heard of, but very few writers whose names are hard to pronounce, if you know what I mean. But as I say, he digs at himself for this, but also kind of just throws up his hands. So it's a book about that kind of book. At one point, he writes, obviously referring to himself, he says that he spent much of his time folding his reading of other writers into tidy collages and letting them do most of the heavy lifting. Okay? That is a very self-deprecating evaluation of his own work. I think The Other Jack is much more than that. Basically, it's a first-person narration from the 70-ish writer and protagonist, Charles Boyle, and it meanders on in this kind of on and off conversation with a much younger female reader and fan, Robin, who's much younger even than his own children. But really their banter is just an excuse for him to reflect on the literary life, but from the margins, not from the mainstream. So he'll quote from books, refer to films, tell anecdotes about writers, tell anecdotes from their books, recount their advice to other writers, includes shop talk about publishing, mention literary influences, literary insecurities, literary tricks, literary fraudulence. He'll riff on the changing of the literary guard, on the purpose and function of literature, on what we can expect from it, on what we can't, on the public performance around it, on the risks of publishing too much, on the difficulty of getting an ending right, on, how does he say it, the perceived moral value of a certain kind of lean literary style. He'll slip into literary criticism at times. There's this very interesting kind of takedown of Cormac McCarthy's The Road. He accuses it of what Nabokov termed posh lust. Read the book to get a full description of that marvelous term. He's also very articulate about the particular pleasures of reading. There's this gorgeous passage about shifting between the world of a book and the real world, like when you look up from the pages of a book and you take in the world around you, that boundary you cross, which he describes as a permeable membrane, invisible but felt, like a cloud passing over the sun. There's also a beautiful line after he quotes a character from War and Peace saying, "Wherever there is judgment, there is always injustice." And then Boyle comments that whatever books are for, it's not to deliver little nuggets of wisdom, but certain lines just stick. It so happens that many of Boyle's lines stuck with me, or struck me as worthy of standing on their own. So I'm going to quote and comment on a few of them so that you can see the tenor and intelligence of this book. To narrow it down, I'm going to focus on the lines that spoke most to me as kind of a hopeless, lifelong literary junkie. But just so you know, on almost every page, the skill and perceptiveness of Boyle would give me these little pleasurable epiphanies of recognition. Boyle writes, "I am straightforwardly English, monoglot, and had a settled childhood, yet for most of my life have had a weak sense of identity, because, I think now, no one questioned it. These are interesting times for white, male, straight, middle-class English writers who had settled childhoods, because questions are being asked. Who do I think I am? Or who cares who I think I am?" You know, I've often thought that we white, male, straight, middle-class writers should be glad that we are being asked to more sharply define ourselves and to know who we are and to make our stories matter before they're sent out into the world. It's an incentive to write better. It keeps us from letting our work go too soon. I mean, so much bad and mediocre writing by writers who represent marginalized peoples or who bang the drum of some supposedly virtuous cause is being published these days because the bar is lowered for anything that fits that description. At one time, all of the glut of bad and mediocre writing getting undeserved praise was being published by white, male, straight, middle-class writers because they had the reins on the industry. And they wrote what literary writers were supposed to write in those days, which ended up being, in many cases, second and third-rate versions of Updike and Roth and Carver and Hunter S. Thompson and Amos. I mean, even those writers wrote second and third-rate versions of themselves. We should feel fortunate, okay, that the value of our stories is being questioned because it forces us to work harder to outdo ourselves. Boyle writes, "Some writers may be better at their jobs than they are at writing. Emotional investment and need for approval can get in the way." This hit close to the bone. I've always been praised as a teacher. I've always been able to memorably convey my point with words and ideas if I'm standing in front of people or if I'm doing a video like this. In part because I'm naturally good at it, but in part because there's very little emotional investment in the outcome. I don't really care that much how it goes over. I don't really care that much if people like it. But for many years, even now, less, but even now, my identity and self-worth was too wrapped up in my writing ability. Boyle writes, "There are, or used to be, people who can write magnificent letters but who become stilted when they attempt to write what we call literature. Yes, what in sports is called a great practice player. They light up the pitch or the court until it's officially game time, until it begins to count. Okay? Emotional investment can be debilitating. We can care too much. Success and approval can matter too much. Boyle writes, "You cannot both write seriously and expect to be rewarded for this by a system you are intelligent enough to oppose." And then almost 100 pages later, he adds, "Writers may well be more prone to self-loathing than others, precisely because their success is measured in worldly terms by the sound of applause, which, in order to write well, they have to distrust." Well, yeah, if I want to write with honesty and integrity, if writing really is my way to get to the bottom of who I am, basically an impossible task, right? Doomed to failure, and really the best I can hope for is something that I'll ultimately be disappointed in on some level, and yet will be my absolute best, and will probably pass without much notice. And if it is noticed, will probably be perceived as weird, or will make the average reader feel uncomfortable or bored or puzzled. Well, yeah, that is just a recipe for self-doubt, and sometimes abject self-doubt and worldly failure. And yet, right, The Other Jack by Charles Boyle, which is honest and gutsy and quirky and will probably bore most readers and probably disappointed Boyle on some level and will probably be forgotten. I hope not. It shouldn't be, but most likely it will be. Nonetheless, spoke deeply to me, and I'm grateful for it. Boyle writes, "I think of myself as a late developer, and I have lots of catching up to do." So do I. And then he explains how that anxiety to catch up and make up for lost time gets into the practice of writing. When I have started something, I'm impatient for it to have been written. And then he concludes that this is part of my not attending properly to what I'm doing. This impacted me because I'm constantly having to remind myself that time is my friend, although I'm not 100% sure that it is. After all, like I said, I'm 56 years old. The train might have left the station, or it might be about to leave the station, okay? And me worrying that it might leave the station without me, and that all the work that I've done, or that I'm doing, won't ever get to where it needs to get to be seen and appreciated. If I worry about all that, that's just going to undermine my writing ability. It tightens me up. Boyle's line reminded me that I just cannot worry. I can't worry. I mean, look, let's say the train has left the station, or if it's going to leave the station before I finish. Well, that's just life. I mean, I'm not going to get on the train with some shoddy product that's only going to embarrass me later. I mean, there are already way too many mediocre books out there. I mean, I'm just going to take the time it needs to take to finish, and then I'm going to just wait for the next train, even though it may not come. Another thing that I really liked about The Other Jack is that it's got an index of subjects talked about with page numbers, so that if after reading it you remember something from it and you want to revisit it, you know exactly where to find it. He's also got a list of references to all the books mentioned in the pages of his novel. For some reason, he doesn't include page numbers with that. An unfortunate oversight there. I love how old books had their tables of contents and their indices. He reminisces, Boyle does, about growing up in Yorkshire, how he would go to the library and pick up books and turn first to the chapter with the most exciting title, and then would follow it with another chapter chosen again for the promise of its title. I did the same. It's a fun way to read, man. In fact, with my expat memoir, My Half Orange, A Story of Love in Language in Seville, I had to fight with my editor to include a table of contents at the front. She thought it was old-fashioned. She thought it would put off readers, but I loved the idea that readers might read my book in the way that Boyle describes. In fact, I had written the book or structured the book so that it could be read that way. Anyway, in The Other Jack by Charles Boyle, I feel like I found a like mind, or as they say in Spanish, un alma gemela, a twin soul. That just doesn't happen every day at my age. I'm going to finish this review with one more line or one more quote from the book. Boyle writes, "There are certain books that mean so much to me, I am reluctant to recommend them to others." Once again, I can relate. I am reluctant to recommend The Other Jack to you all because it would break my heart if you didn't love it as much as I do.